Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Ontario Hotels Crisis and Recovery. We certainly appreciate the time that you're taking to join us today for our 45-minute to 1-hour session. We ask that everyone has muted themselves within the Zoom forum. And throughout the session, our guest host will be providing us with the Crisis and Recovery presentation. My name is Fatima Finnegan, and I'm with the Ontario Restaurant, Hotel and Motel Association, and I will be acting as your moderator today, along with Emile Gourieux, our colleague from STR. As you are muted, we will walk through the presentation. Without any objection, I will be recording today's session so that we could be providing you with a copy of the session, and a copy of the presentation will also be provided to you in the email that will come to you later this afternoon. These have been very trying times for our sector, and we are pleased to have you all join us today. Today's special guest, Emile Gourieux, is the Hotel Sector Business Development Executive for STR in Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean. STR provides clients with premium global data and analytics. Emile is responsible for growing STR's network. Just getting a bit of sound back. Emile is responsible for growing STR's network of hotel partners and strengthening their overall data set. Along with increasing the volume of room-related data, Emile also champions efforts to expand benchmark reporting in categories such as food and beverage, guest segmentation, and operating statistics, so that hoteliers will have the information they need to thrive. More than ever, we are very reliant on data, and today's session is very important to our sector, not only because of pre-COVID and COVID numbers, but where do we go from here, and how do we look at our sector in forecasting? So, Emile, thank you so much for joining us today. And I will let you take it.
I can park on my site. Then I can
Sounds great. If we can just have everyone. It's not pleasant. If you can please mute yourselves, so that will let us get through this with no disruptions. So thank you, Fatima, again for that introduction, and good afternoon. Thank you to everyone joining us today on this webinar. I really appreciate the Ontario Restaurant, Hotel and Motel Association for sponsoring this and helping put this together. We have a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to be moving through these slides pretty quickly, but I just want everyone to know, as Fatima mentioned, we're going to provide the recording and this presentation deck afterwards, so don't feel like you have to take notes or take screenshots. You'll have access to all of this. We're going to have time for questions at the end, but if there's a pressing issue, put that in the chat box, and Fatima will stop me if we need to, but otherwise we'll take all those questions at the end. I'm really excited because we're going to look at the latest data we're seeing for Canada and specifically Ontario, but we're also going to look at our newest forecast for 2021 for Canada and specifically for Toronto, and then look at some consumer insights on international travel as well. So before we get started, I always like to provide just a quick reminder of what STR does and where our data comes from. STR works with hotels and destinations all over the world, and we give them information that they need to make the best business decisions possible. Our data comes directly from our hotel partners, so it's completely reliable information right from the source. And most importantly, we always keep individual hotel data completely confidential. We never share data from an individual hotel, owner, brand, or group with anyone. That way we can provide that valuable, actionable market level data that will benefit everyone. So let's get started. I want to look quickly back at 2019 just to give us some context for what we're seeing right now, and just for that, feel a little bit better, a nostalgic look at the good old days. Looking at total Canadian performance, again, 2019 was the end of a great run for hotels. Not that it was a horrible year, but RevPAR growth was basically flat. It was down only 0.3 of a point from 2018. And that was really mainly due to flat demand growth being overshadowed by pretty steady supply growth. In Ontario, Ontario had a bit of a tough 2019 as well. It was the first year since 2009 to see negative RevPAR growth. And for those of you that were around in 2009, you probably remember the steep drop in demand that year. It was down more than 6% year over year. And although there was a slight drop in demand this past year, 2019, it was that increasing supply that really drove down occupancy and led to the decline in RevPAR for Ontario. But that's pretty typical, considering that RevPAR was down almost everywhere in Canada last year. There were only 3 provinces that were able to grow RevPAR in 2019. Both British Columbia and Quebec came in at just over 2% RevPAR growth, and then New Brunswick was just barely. It was really flat. It was 0.3% RevPAR growth for the year. And you can see that Ontario was able to grow rates a bit, despite that nearly 2% decrease in occupancy. But now, we're in a new year and frankly, a whole new world. I'm waiting to get back into another new year, 2021, to hopefully see some positive changes. But let's take a look at how things have changed during this crisis. So as of December 5th, RevPAR for total Canada is exactly 70% lower than it was the same time last year. Now that's a disappointing number in a couple of different ways. For one, obviously, that's a really bad number. But what's even worse is that the year-over-year drop had eased quite a bit recently, especially over the summer. Year-over-year RevPAR decreases for Canada had eased up, and they were in the upper 50s for a couple of weeks at the end of August and the beginning of September. But now we're back into the off season, and we're kind of heading in the wrong direction again, which you'll see is pretty typical for most regions right now. But it's the same with occupancy too. Canadian occupancy had finally overcome that 40% mark at the beginning of September, but that is going to be the high water mark for this year now that we're well into the off season. So I mentioned this, but as of the end of November, the good news is that we've hit bottom and we're now climbing out of this valley, even if it is a very long, slow climb with some occasional setbacks. But occupancy growth in most regions around the world is starting to stall right now. The U.S. had hit 50% in mid-August, but it's slipped back down over the last few months. And again, that's a sure sign that summer's over. And frankly, with the exception of some holiday breaks, occupancy is going to really level out, and that occupancy growth is going to stall for a while until business travel starts coming back. Business travel makes up 20 to 25% of overall demand. So until companies are comfortable sending their employees back on the road, it's going to be a while before we get back to normal. It's the same situation for Canada. Occupancy had been on a steady climb, but now we're seeing that same dip in occupancy again over the past couple of months, and again for the same reasons. The high season has come and gone, and we're now into those slower winter months. On the other end of the spectrum, though, there's beach destinations like Mexico and the Caribbean, and they continue to see occupancy growth as a lot of North American travelers are looking for an escape from the winter weather. So I want to start focusing more locally and break out the data that we're seeing for Ontario. To start out, it's worth looking at the day-by-day data just to see what has happened in the province this year. And first of all, looking at the normal times at the beginning of the year, it's interesting to see the occupancy swings during the week. It seems like it's really boom or bust for Ontario hotels depending on the day. If you look at that, there's a 30 to 40% 30 to 40 point swing in occupancy for some days. And, it still amazes me to see just how quickly occupancy dropped off in March. It hit almost all the way down to 10% for Ontario hotels. Then over the summer, Ontario occupancy was back up into the 40s with occasional peaks above 50%. But again, the off season is pushing occupancy back down now around that 30% mark. The good news is that we've started to see that normal occupancy swing again, although midweek business is still very soft, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So I was able to compare Ottawa and Toronto's occupancy and ADR right now with some of the other key metros across Canada. And again, this is for the week ending December 5th, so just a couple of weeks ago. And as usual, Vancouver tends to outperform other Canadian cities, but occupancy and rates there have really taken a huge hit this year. The scary part is that it's been even tougher for Toronto, though. Around the same time last year, Toronto was getting higher rates than Vancouver, $190 in Toronto compared to about $170 for Vancouver. But now COVID has really taken a toll on Toronto ADR. Here's the data for the same week ending December 5th. This is for the province of Ontario and all of your submarkets and markets. So you can kind of see how you're comparing to your neighbors. And to give you an idea we'll see more about Toronto. I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll see more about Toronto and its submarkets in just a moment. But I do want to give everyone a moment to look through this list to find your area. I think the real takeaway from this slide is the difference between what's happening in urban areas compared to those more rural destinations. If you compare the occupancies of Toronto versus Thunder Bay, for example, and then look at Oshawa with nearly 50% occupancy, this supports that idea that people are trying to get away from those dense cities and escape to the less crowded areas where they can spread out, enjoy nature, and breathe some fresh air. That's really clear on this graph as well. The rural destinations of Sudbury and Thunder Bay, for example, have suffered the least, with RevPAR down only about 30% year over year. I know I say only 30%, but compared to some of these other areas, that's pretty good. Look at Toronto. Occupancy is down 74% from the same time last year. And RevPAR in Toronto is down 78%. We saw earlier that Ottawa is doing better than most major metros, but unfortunately, it's still feeling those effects of this crisis more than the more rural areas in Toronto or in Ontario. So, like I said, let's take a closer look at Toronto. And just as we've been talking about, city centers continue to see very little activity with the almost total absence of business travel and groups. Downtown Toronto hotels are barely breaking out of single-digit occupancy right now. Hotels in the suburbs, especially to the north and then the east of town, are doing really the best with over 35% occupancy. And then as we saw just a minute ago, if you keep going further east, you'll hit Oshawa, where they're at nearly 50% occupancy. So again, people are trying to escape to those less dense areas. Here's the year-over-year change again in RevPAR broken down by occupancy and rate. And it's no surprise, RevPAR is down more than 90% for downtown hotels right now. But even in the Northeast submarket, where occupancy is more than 3 times the downtown occupancy, RevPAR is still down almost 70% year over year there. So it's a tough story for everybody. A big reason occupancy is so low for Toronto, especially downtown hotels, is the lack of business travel that we've talked about, but more so group business. Group business is virtually non-existent right now. Group RevPAR for Toronto, the Toronto market, was down more than 96% in October compared to last year. Now, hopefully, the new vaccines that have just been released will be effective, and hopefully they can be widely distributed pretty quickly, because only then is business travel and group, especially big convention travel, going to start getting back to normal. In normal times, midweek occupancy in Toronto is about 10 points higher than it is on the weekend. So, midweek business is much stronger than weekend leisure. But with the complete disappearance of business travel and groups, midweek business is really suffering. Now, leisure is really pushing demand to the weekends for a change. And it's really the same with ADR. Midweek rates are down $100 from last year for Toronto. And again, that typical pattern of strong midweek business has been flipped on its head. Normally, midweek rates are $40 higher than weekends, but now when leisure demand is all that exists, weekends are seeing higher rates. So looking quickly at segmentation again for Ottawa and talking about that group, the story is exactly the same. Amazingly, group occupancy for Ottawa in October was 0.5%. That's right, 0.5% group occupancy for Ottawa in October. And the switch in patterns in the day of week data for Ottawa is even more pronounced than it was in Toronto. Sure, midweek occupancy is still leading in Ottawa, even if it's just barely. But compare that to a year ago when midweek occupancy was up to 20 points higher than the weekend. So, now it's even, when in normal times, midweek sees occupancy is 20 points higher than weekend occupancy. And with ADR, again, COVID has pretty much flattened the pattern across the days of the week. Last year, midweek business travelers were paying $30 to $40 more than leisure travelers on the weekend. But now weekend rates have taken that slight lead. And I'll repeat, until business and group travel comes back, I think we're going to continue to see this shift in leisure travel and weekend business. So that's definitely something that hoteliers need to keep in mind so that they can be reaching out to. Somehow I keep getting muted. So, hoteliers need to keep this in mind so that they can be reaching out to the right segments and the right, trying to reach the right guest pool to fill their rooms. So, that's how things are right now. I want to move on because I know everyone is really wanting to see the forecast and what the future holds. I know everybody's trying to build your own forecast for 2021. So hopefully this will help a little bit. This is what we're projecting for total Canada. And unfortunately, it could be 2025 before we get back to those pre-COVID numbers. Hopefully having a vaccine again and a good worldwide distribution plan will help speed up this timeline, and we update our forecasts for Canada and for the major markets of Canada every quarter. So who knows, come 2 or 3 months from now, if we're seeing good progress on the distribution of the vaccine and maybe the land border is going to open, we'll adjust this to be more positive. But looking at this, obviously 2020 is going to be the valley that we're climbing out of for years. But even 2021 RevPAR right now is predicted to be more than 38% lower than 2019. And if you look, that's comparable to 2003 performance. The last year that RevPAR was lower than $66, what we're projecting for 2021, was all the way back in 1997. And this is the forecast for the Toronto market. And unfortunately, we're projecting an even bigger gap between 2021 and 2019 numbers, a drop in RevPAR of more than 50%. And again, 2003 is that comparison year when RevPAR was $71. Now, that was a tough year, 2003 for Canada and Toronto. You have to actually go all the way back to 1996 to find a lower RevPAR for Toronto hotels when that year ended at $68 RevPAR. Now again, I know Fatima had a question about how accurate our historical numbers and more so our projections are. So I can answer that very quickly. The historical numbers that we saw, that benchmarking, is very accurate because that data again comes directly from our hotel partners. So it's not scraped data, it's not projections, it's real data. Obviously, it depends on hotels participating in our platform. So the more hotels that participate, the better and more comprehensive data we can provide to the hotel association to better lobby for hotels, hotel friendly legislation and provide strategize their marketing. But for our projections, these forecasts, obviously in normal times, our accuracy rate is within 3 percentage point, it's within 3% for nearly all of our projections. Obviously, these are not normal times. Again, there are so many unknowns right now. Is the vaccine going to be effective? Is it going to be distributed? When are the land borders going to open? When are groups going to come back? When is, there's just so much that we don't know. So obviously, we're going to keep updating these. And it's good to keep in mind that these projections are based on what's happening right now. I sympathize. I managed hotels for many years, and I know it's in normal times it's hard to make your projections for your forecast, for your budgeting, and it's nearly impossible right now. My advice to hoteliers is to narrow your focus to the short term and focus on reaching those guests that, again, look at the day of week patterns, look at where your drive-to markets and things like that. Focus your attention on winning in the short term, because it's going to be impossible to really really plan that far ahead. So again, just a reminder, this presentation is available for everybody. You'll have time to study those projections, those forecasts at your leisure. I do want to move on now because I know we are under time constraints, but the last thing I want to talk about is consumer sentiment. Pardon me. How are people feeling about traveling in the time of COVID? How do we need to start rethinking who our most reachable guests are. So in addition to the land border being closed between Canada and the US, air travel continues to be a really big issue, and not just internationally. Until travelers are willing to board planes in large numbers, demand is going to continue to suffer. Here in the US, the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, they track the number of passengers going through checkpoints. So in other words, how many people are boarding planes each week. And we were seeing a really nice steady increase in air travel for a while. But since mid-July, that trend has really disappeared. There are the exceptions of the occasional spike here and there. But there's been virtually no increase in air passengers in the U.S. over the last few months, 0.9% increase on average. A lot of that has to do, again, with the fact that summer has ended. The high season is over, but it reflects more, I think, that continued increases in COVID cases and that continued feeling of uneasiness, that fear of being on a crowded plane for hours at a time. Now, the most recent survey from December 2nd by Longwoods International and the Miles Partnership shows that in larger and larger numbers, U.S. consumers have continued to change their travel plans, not only from international trips to domestic trips, but from fly-to destinations to drive-to markets. So, and then of course, many people are canceling travel altogether. This last week, 36% of respondents said that they have canceled a trip completely, and another 43% have reduced their travel plans. 28% have switched from flying to driving, and 17% have changed an international trip to a domestic stay. That same study also asked U.S. consumers how they've changed their plans to travel over the holidays. And almost half had not planned to travel for the holidays, and they'll remain home, while only 7% of people who had originally not had travel plans are now all of a sudden going to be hitting the road. 15% have canceled travel plans completely, and then 10% were going to travel by plane for the holidays, but now they've changed that to car travel. And then sadly, as we saw in the US over the Thanksgiving holiday, even with those who did travel, very few stayed in hotels. They chose to stay instead with friends and family. So even that spike, if we look back at the Thanksgiving spike in air travel, it did nothing for hotels because people were staying with friends and family rather than hotels. So, we know this. We actually saw hotel occupancy decline over that long weekend. So that's it. It's not exactly a pretty picture, but there are some glimmers of hope here and there. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. A lot, again, depends on the vaccine and what happens with it, because that's going to determine how quickly business travel comes back and group travel comes back. And that's really what's going to drive any return to normal and those pre-COVID numbers of occupancy and ADR. Until then, we have to think as creatively as possible about where to find new guests and how to attract them. How do we adapt, survive, and eventually thrive? Because I really do have faith in the hotel industry. That's what makes the hotel industry special, is that we have gotten through these tough downturns before. Obviously, this one's unprecedented, but we will get through this if we use the data that's available to us if we support each other. So before I wrap things up, I have a little surprise for Ontario hotels that I want to talk about. It's something that I am especially excited about. It's something I've been working to bring to the hotel industry, with STR for 3 years now. It's been my passion, and I'm excited that we're actually able to launch this now because I think it's going to be a big help for hotels along the road to recovery. We're launching our new forward-looking report called the Forward Star. Now, Montreal is going to be our first market to go live in Canada. Actually, Montreal will be the first North American market of all. So I'm excited that it's going to be a Canadian market that we're launching this in. But as soon as we complete that launch in the next few weeks, we'll be ready to roll it out across other markets in Canada. And I would love to get a head start, especially in Toronto and Ottawa. STR's new Forward Stars is going to let you see how your occupancy on the books, your pickup and cancellations, how they all compare to your local market. So, the reports come out weekly. The weekly reports will let you see 90 days ahead, and the monthly reports will actually look out a full year, 365 days. And that's going to let you see dates that are not selling so well, so you can adjust rates or offer special promotions to really drive demand. Plus, you're going to be able to see dates that are selling more quickly than expected, so that you can close channels and close discounts and really push rates to take advantage of that increased demand. And then, tracking pickup from week to week is going to give you an extra tool to really make sure your marketing and sales strategies are working. I really think this report is going to be a huge help during this recovery. It's going to let you answer questions like what nights are selling out and what nights are not moving at all. Should you rethink your strategies around distribution and marketing? And then, are you really taking advantage of high demand times to drive rates in the near future? The best part about this is that it's completely free. For any hotel on our platform, you have the opportunity to participate in the Forward Star reports at no extra cost. And, I'm going to be reaching out to everybody starting in January or February to talk more about this and get you signed up. But don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you want to go ahead and sign up now. Again, I'd love to get a head start on the market. The faster we get people signed up, the faster we can launch the reports in your markets. And, there's so much to gain from this program and no cost at all to participate. So I hope that everybody's as excited as I am about it. I want to thank the Ontario Restaurant Hotel Motel Association for sponsoring this, for being a wonderful partner. I do want to encourage everybody again, STR's reports. We offer a free hotel survey report to any hotel that wants to join our platform and provide their data. Again, your data remains confidential, but it does go to help the hotel association and your local DMOs do what they do best to promote tourism in your area. So you're getting a double benefit. You're getting a tool to use to improve your revenue management, but you're also helping everyone rise up. So I'm happy to take some questions, Fatima, if there were any questions out there. People can also contact me directly. My email is here. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always sharing updates there.
Thank you so much, Emil. Certainly a lot of information. I think we need to possibly look at changing your last name from Guru to Guru. And the data shown certainly is not one that is a big surprise, but it's certainly one that adds confidence to when we're forecasting and putting our numbers together that there's a backup to the data. I'm just waiting for some questions to come through from our eager group. Don't be shy. I do have a question around collaborations. And we know that the world post-COVID and during COVID is different to pre-COVID. People will be doing business differently. When we're looking at collaborations, are there trends that you're seeing of who hotels are collaborating with when they're thinking outside the box to drive some of that RevPAR and occupancy in the books?
Well, that's a good question. It's not something our data speaks to, but maybe anecdotally, I may have. I think the most important thing, and I kind of touched on this already, is for hotels to really, lean on the resource that is their hotel association and their local DMOs, because that's exactly what you're there for. You're there to support your hotel members. It's not exactly a collaboration, but I will talk about it because I've seen it work with hotels, and it's interesting. A piece of data to support this. We have a kind of a pilot program for short-term stay rentals, vacation rentals, and one of the markets is Miami, and we saw the average length of stay for vacation rentals in Miami go from typically 4 or 5 days in normal times to, in the peak of this pandemic, their average length of stay went all the way up to, I think it was 28 or 29 days, which is insane to me. I come from a hotel where I was thrilled to get a 2.5 day average length of stay. But what that tells me is that, people, I look at my situation. I'm working from home still. My daughter is studying from home. She's doing virtual classes. So there's no reason that we can't take a little trip and I can work from the hotel. She can study from the hotel. So again, work from home can just as easily be work from anywhere. And if hoteliers are able to take advantage of that, shift their marketing to that idea, that might be a way of boosting some midweek travel that's suffering so much right now, and filling that gap that's left by the absence of business travel.
We've actually seen quite a bit of that from independent properties marketing a work from home package where you can get away from the home where the kids are, where the students are, and trying to find space, quite frankly, in a home to do some work. That has become certainly an opportunity for our sector to drive some business back into some market segments that we want to push forward. I have a question around forecasting. And Emile, do we have a separate forecast for downtown Toronto versus the greater Toronto area? So is there one specific to the core of downtown versus out and about and around?
So we don't have what I'll call an off-the-shelf forecast for submarkets. We do a quarterly forecast for Canada as a whole, and then for 3 major markets in Canada, we have a quarterly forecast for the Vancouver market, the Toronto market, and the Montreal market. So every quarter we're putting those out. We do custom forecast, and what I recommend if somebody wants a custom forecast is that you get it on your comp set. So then it's even more relevant than looking at the downtown submarket or the airport submarket. We will build a custom forecast based on your specific comp set, so you know that it is the most relevant projection for your hotel. So absolutely, we can do that.
And Emil, is that above and beyond the forward report that you have presented today?
Yeah, that has nothing to do with our forward STR. We have an analytics team that builds forecasts, based on what's happened in historical performance, what's going on in the markets as far as supply and demand dynamics, events, macro and microeconomics. I mean, they do a very in-depth study to make typically it's an 18-month projection, so month by month what they're expecting for whatever market or submarket or comp set. Now, what's going to be great is that when we do have forward STR in place for these markets or for comp sets, then they can look at that as well and add that into their analysis. And I think that's going to improve the accuracy of our forecasts. So they're not completely unrelated, but at the moment they are. We don't use that forward data just because we're still building it in North America.
I'm curious, for properties in a given area, is there benchmarking capabilities that an operator, say in Kitchener-Waterloo, and if they're running a certain occupancy, RevPAR, average rate, how do they compare themselves to how others are doing in their segment and city area?
Sure, I'm going to take us back to this slide because this is Ontario and every submarket in Ontario, with the exception of Toronto's submarket. Just I've got them all grouped in Toronto. But you mentioned Kitchener. So Kitchener's submarket, a little bit bigger than Kitchener. It includes Guelph and Cambridge. But so even as a free report, a hotel in Kitchener can see how their performance compares to their larger market, which is obviously a much larger area, but also their submarket, which is Kitchener, Cambridge, Guelph. And it also breaks down, to make it a little more relevant, it breaks down your submarket class. So how are all of the hotels in your same price range in your submarket performing? So you can see actually 4 different comparisons, absolutely free. Market, all hotels in your market; market class, all hotels in the same price range in your larger market; and then submarket, that smaller area; and submarket class, which is the closest thing to having a real comp set, because it's all of those like-priced hotels in your smaller area. Now, obviously, if you can afford it and pay for a comp set report, then you can choose 4, 5, 6 hotels as your comp set, so you can see how you're performing against the average of those hotels, and that's the most apples to apples. But I, as a GM many years ago, I used that free report, what's called the hotel survey, for years, just because even if it's not exactly my competition, it's so nice to be able to benchmark my performance. Am I growing as quickly? Or in this case, am I being hit as hard as my competition? And especially when demand starts coming back, the fear is that there's going to be this race to a bottom in rates. And what data has shown is that the first hotels to slash rates are the last hotels to actually fully recover. So being able to keep an eye on what's happening with rates in your market, in like-priced hotels in your submarket, it's going to give you a tool to really get through this recovery period as best you can.
Very important. I'm going to ask if you could take us to the last slide. And with that information, I want to show everyone your email address so that they can actually send you a quick note right now to say, Emil, I'm interested in being part of the free surveyed report to participate. We know that we have a number of members that currently are part of and included in this process, but certainly for those on the call, I encourage you to email Emil asking him to touch base with you to be part of this free service, or as my mother would say, cheap and cheery. And using this free access to this tool will certainly help us during these times, especially with forecasting and knowing where we sit with our market.
And if you can't spell my name, you can always email info@str.com and it will find its way to me.
Emil, I have a question, as I hope your emails are flooding through. Are there certain hotel classifications like limited service, full service, luxury that are recovering quicker than others? And does that vary by market? Very good question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I mean, there are certain locations that are doing better, or at least were over the summer. For example, resort destinations were doing better, where people were getting out of the urban areas and going to a resort area to, where they could spread out. Those were certainly, they were seeing advantages. But when you talk about class and even limited service versus full service, I think those full service hotels have taken the biggest hit, mainly because they are typically the most dependent on group business. Those big box hotels with big ballrooms, they are not getting those conventions and those groups. And honestly, a lot of them have closed down. The majority of the temporarily closed hotels have been those upper up and luxury hotels that that just don't have any business. That's one thing that has kind of caused ADR to shift down overall. I mentioned the race to the bottom. It's not that yet that we're seeing. Obviously we're seeing lower ADRs than last year, but that's mainly because the ADR, the rates that we're collecting are from the more economical hotels that are remaining open and frankly getting more demand than the luxury hotels. So our ADR is now based on that the lower end of the spectrum rather than having a more balanced look. What's interesting is there is obviously a drop in ADR by class. Economic hotels are getting lower rates, just like luxury hotels are getting lower rates. That's happening. But what we have seen is that year-over-year drop tends to be less in the luxury and upper upscale hotels. It could be, depending on market, of course, it could be 10% drop year-over-year for luxury hotels and maybe close to a 30% drop for economic. Again, it's going to vary by market. But there have been, especially over the summer when we were having pretty good demand, not only in the U.S., but in Canadian resort markets and even now in Mexico and the Caribbean where they're still growing in occupancy. There are many beach destinations and resort destinations that are even seeing year-over-year growth in rates. So, there are still opportunities out.
For those that are looking to forecast beyond 2021, you had shared some numbers for 2022 as well. Are they broken down into quarters? When will we see a more of an influx rise? Is it by quarter, by month, or does it really depend?
So, yeah, our forecast, we do a 5-year forecast. Even in normal times, it's hard to to guess what's going to happen 5 years from now. So, the majority of our forecast and the ones that I use are 18-month forecasts. So right now, the one that just came out in November covers all of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022. And it's too early to say, really, because we're hoping that the vaccine is widely available by second, early, let's say Q3 of next year, which would really mean that 2022 we've got a chance at getting back to normal. But yes, our forecast will look month by month. They'll look quarter by quarter, and then they'll look out by year, depending on how far you want it to go out. I promise to come back and do this again if you want when we release our next forecast, which will probably be coming out in February.
Okay.
So maybe by then we'll have a better, some better news to report.
So maybe what we'll mark and save the date is a March 2021, same time, same place, and we'll invite our hotel members to join us, because any insight is good insight during these turbulent times. Emile, you have been such a pleasure to have with us today. The information you've presented has been riveting and informative. We appreciate you providing a copy of this that we will send out with the recording of today's session. But we thank you for your time and for your knowledge. And for all those that have joined us today, we will continue to keep you informed as your provincial association. We again encourage you to email Emile Gourier at str.com to access some of the free tools and reports that are available to you at no cost. We thank you so much for your time, for your commitment. We ask that you all continue to be safe and have a wonderful day. Emile, thank you, and we will see you in Q1 of 2021.
Thank you. Hopefully in person.
Yes. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.